T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Cause this shit's fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Cause this shit's fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Cause this shit's fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is so sad.
What's going on, everyone? JT Sports here, back at you guys with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. Training camp is just around the corner, man, and with training camp being only a few days away, we got to dive into some of these training camp previews, and we're starting off with the AFC North, which I believe is going to be the toughest division in the NFL this upcoming season. We're going to be giving out training camp previews for the Ravens, Browns, Steelers, and the Bengals before we dive into it. If you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. We go live daily, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Listen to the audio version of the JT Sports Podcast. We're not just available on YouTube. You can find us on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, leave us with a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. We are trying to get to 100 5-star reviews before the start of the college football season and the NFL season kick off. So once again on this episode, we're going to be discussing AFC North training camp, giving out previews for all the teams in the AFC North division. And I'm also going to be giving my thoughts on a recent article that I read about the potential possibility of Quinn Ewers being a top 10 pick in next year's 2024 NFL draft. So we got a really good show on deck. Let's get into it. Training camp preview for the Cincinnati Bengals. What do you need to know about the Bengals going into training camp this year? Key position battles, players to look out for. Let's get into one of the most important position battles in all of the NFL. The starting right tackle spot for the Cincinnati Bengals. This is going to be really key to Cincinnati having a good offensive line this year. I'm pretty confident that you solved your issues at left tackle by signing Orlando Brown to a lucrative contract. You got two really good offensive guards. You're set at center. Your only biggest bugaboo going into this season is who the hell is going to be starting at right tackle. Now, you have several options at right tackle. You got Jonah Williams, who is expected to be the favorite to win that starting job. He's moving over from left tackle to right tackle, and he was not good last year. He gave up 12 to 13 sacks at left tackle, and you got to remember that Jonah Williams was a guy who was a former first-round pick by Cincinnati in the 2019 NFL Draft. So, at this point, if he doesn't end up being able to have a serviceable season at right tackle, you pretty much could label this guy a bust. And this is also a big year for him because he's trying to get another contract. And he asked for a trade right after the Cincinnati Bengals signed Orlando Brown, but I guess the Bengals couldn't find any trade partners for Jonah Williams, so he still remains with the Bengals going into camp. And most Bengals fans do expect him to win the starting right tackle job. La'el Collins, we don't even know if he's going to be healthy for any point of training camp. He is expected to be put on the PUP list, which stands for player unable to perform. And he was a huge disappointment last year. You got to remember that they signed La'el Collins to a 3-year, $21 million contract in free agency last offseason. And not only was he a massive disappointment at right tackle for Cincinnati in 2022, but he also got hurt near the tail end of the season, tearing his ACL and PCL against New England. So he probably won't be available for the start of training camp, but they do have second round pick from the 2021 NFL draft, Jackson Carman. Now, Jackson Carman came in at left tackle in replace of Jonah Williams when he got hurt, and he played pretty well in the postseason for Cincinnati. He played well against the Buffalo Bills. I also feel like he played pretty good against the Baltimore Ravens the game before that in the wild card round. Now, some people equate the success that Jackson Carman had in the postseason due to the fact that he had conditions from the weather that kind of were favorable for him due to the fact that they were playing in snow. So it's kind of hard for pass rushers to be really effective when you got to deal with the snow. But Jackson Carman is probably the guy who's going to end up competing with Jonah Williams for the starting right tackle spot, at least until we can figure out the extent to when La'el Collins is going to be healthy to return. The next position battle that we got to look at for the Cincinnati Bengals is strong safety. Now, this may not be one of those position battles that you look at and you're like, oh, is this really a position battle? Because you do feel pretty good about Nick Scott being your starting safety this year. I think that he can give you pretty solid play from that strong safety position, but you got to remember that you lost Jesse Bates and Von Bell. Now, I think that Cincinnati was prepared to lose Von Bell, but I don't really think they were expecting to lose their other starting safety neither. So you're trying to replace two safeties. You already got Dax Hill, who you drafted in the first round, who's going to end up being one of those replacements, but who's going to end up being the other starting safety? And like I said, Nick Scott was a solid pickup by Cincinnati in free agency. He spent his last couple of years in the league with the LA Rams. He helped lead them to the Super Bowl. He had a pretty significant impact on that championship team, and last year was his first season ever as the full-time starter for the Rams. And one thing about Nick Scott is that he's not bad at anything in particular, but he's not great at anything. He doesn't really have any outstanding skills that stands out to you. And last year, he had 86 tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles. So this is somebody who is a pretty good tackler in the open field. He can lay a big hit out on you. He also isn't too bad at coverage, but I think there's a good possibility he could get challenged by rookie safety Jordan Battle, who the Cincinnati Bengals drafted in the 3rd round from this past year's draft out of Alabama. And I was a huge fan of Jordan Battle when he was coming out. He may not be as athletically gifted as a guy like Dax Hill is, but this is somebody who has high football IQ. During his time at Bama, he always seemed to be in the right position during the right time to make big plays. And he also has the versatility to play both strong and free safety for Cincinnati. And he's really good in coverage. So Lou Anarumo can unveil some 3 safety sets that has 3 safeties on the field. You can put Jordan Battle in the slot if you want him to match up against slot receivers, or you can have him close to the line of scrimmage guarding out against running backs and tight ends and coverage. I just think that Jordan Battle is too good of a player not to have on the field, and I do think that there's a strong chance that he could end up winning that starting safety job over our guy Nick Scott from the LA Rams. Now, some players that I'm going to be watching throughout training camp for the Cincinnati Bengals. First of all, I'm going to start with rookie cornerback DJ Turner. He was one of my favorite cornerbacks coming out of this past year's draft. This dude is really sticky in coverage. He has good technique, good fundamentals, and he is incredibly athletic. And he's one of the more athletic cornerbacks that have came out of the draft within the last couple of years. This dude ran a 4.26 40-yard dash. And he also is able to change his direction on the whim. He has pretty good hips. He's fluid in his movements and motions. So if we end up seeing Cam Taylor-Britt, who is supposed to be slotted in at that other cornerback spot on the opposite side of Chidobe Awuzie, if he ends up struggling this year, we probably are going to see DJ Turner being the next man up. I think that DJ Turner was a very great pick for the Cincinnati Bengals in round 2. And I would even be surprised if he ends up playing so well during the preseason and performs well throughout training camp that maybe he ends up pushing Cam Taylor-Britt down the depth chart for that other cornerback spot. Because Cam Taylor-Britt, yeah, he had some good moments during his rookie season, and he played pretty well during the postseason, but you got to remember that you got a guy like DJ Turner coming out of Michigan who had a really great defense, and somebody who has this kind of athleticism and also is a little bit more fundamentally sound than what Cam Taylor-Britt is. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up hearing some rumblings the first couple of days throughout camp about how good DJ Turner is and how he could end up competing for Cam Taylor-Britt for that other starting cornerback job. Now, obviously, we're going to keep our eyes on Cam Taylor-Britt because he was a rookie who was asked to step up in a major way last season for Cincinnati when Chidobe Awuzie got injured, and I think that he did a pretty good job. He was a top 10 rookie cornerback based on the metrics and statistics for rookie cornerbacks last season, but I still feel like there's more to be desired with him. We still have to wait and see. So I want to see how he's going to match up against these wide receivers in training camp. Because me being a Steelers fan, I remember a couple of years ago when Artie Burns kept going up against Antonio Brown in training camp, and everybody was hyping up Artie Burns for having the wherewithal to go against Antonio Brown and challenge himself. But every time I was watching clips of their 1v1s, Artie Burns was getting burned. No pun intended. So is Cam Taylor-Britt going to end up being a guy that we hear a lot of hype around, but when the tape comes out, he doesn't really end up looking all that good? Or is he going to be somebody who we hear clamping up guys like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd throughout training camp? Because if you're a cornerback, you're getting some of the best work that you can get when you have the best receiving core in the NFL that you're going to be practicing against every single day. So I want to hear a lot of good things from Cam Taylor-Britt. That cornerback spot outside of Chidobe Awuzie is going to be a really big position to watch if you're a Bengals fan, not just throughout training camp, but throughout the whole entire season. Because if you can have two Chidobe Awuzie's, not just including him, but two cornerbacks on his caliber, you should have a pretty good secondary. I'm not really worried about Dax Hill. I think Nick Scott can be solid, but I would like for Jordan Battle to take that starting role from him eventually some point throughout this year. So really, if you can get your second cornerback spot secured, you should have a really fantastic defense this year. And the Bengals have always had really good defenses under Lou Anarumo, but something that kind of held them back was the cornerback position when Chidobe Awuzie went down with that injury. It wasn't a liability, but it wasn't a strength. So if you can get good play out of Cam Taylor-Britt, I think that your secondary could be really good this year. And you got to remember that you're moving away from Eli Apple. Eli Apple wasn't a terrible starter like how many people make him out to be in the national media. He was really productive at times. So you can do a lot worse than an Eli Apple. So I got to keep my eyes on Cam Taylor-Britt. Running back Chase Brown, 5th round selection out of Illinois. This is somebody who a good amount of Bengals fans have a lot of excitement about. And the sentiment is that he potentially is going to be the guy who pushes out Joe Mixon. Now, I don't think that Chase Brown is going to push Joe Mixon that much for the RB1 role this year, and I don't really think that he's going to have as big as an impact as a lot of Cincinnati Bengals fans are hoping he will have. I think that Joe Mixon, without a question, is the RB1 for Cincinnati at this moment. I don't expect that to really change. I expect him to get the bulk load of the carries. And when you look at Chase Brown, he is a pretty solid running back. I watched a lot of him coming out of Illinois. Very tough. This is somebody who has solid vision, really good speed and acceleration, but he has a fumbling issue, which really concerns me. And then two, he's more of a one-cut back. All right, this is somebody who makes one cut and gone. But outside of that, he doesn't really have a lot of elusiveness. He does have some high yards after contact numbers, but when I watch him, I don't really see somebody who consistently breaks through tackles. I see somebody who kind of wins more off his one-cut ability and his speed and acceleration. So I still think that Chase Brown is far from a finished product that Cincinnati is getting. And I also love me some Travion Williams. And I was a big fan of him when he was coming out of Texas A&M. If we're having like a conversation about any position battle being taking place in this running back room, it probably should be for the RB2 spot that Cincinnati currently has, because you got to remember that they lost Samaj P. Ryan in free agency. So who's going to be the backup behind Joe Mixon? Could it be Travion Williams or Chase Brown? I guess we will see, but I got to keep my eyes on Chase Brown just because a lot of Bengals fans are really excited about him, and I'm not trying to make it seem like he's a bad player or anything, but I don't think this dude is good enough to just come in as a rookie and just dethrone Joe Mixon for that RB1 spot. And we will see. That's why I have him on my watch list for players to watch. But I think he's somebody who still needs a year or two of development before he's able to take over the full workload of a RB1. And the last dude I'm going to be watching during training camp for the Cincinnati Bengals is going to be tight end Irv Smith. Now, Irv Smith was a second-round pick years ago out of Alabama by Minnesota, and I feel like he was severely underutilized during his time with the Minnesota Vikings. And every single year there will be a lot of hype about him, what he could do, his athleticism and his upside, and every single season I get let down. Now, him going to Cincinnati, I feel like could rejuvenate or kind of jumpstart his career. Now, he only signed the one-year deal this offseason with Cincinnati. And I think that Irv Smith can be pretty productive with the Cincinnati Bengals this year. Now, of course, you're going to ask JT, where are the targets coming from for Irv Smith when you already have to fight for targets with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd? Well, you got to remember that last year, Hayden Hurst had a really productive season for Cincinnati. I feel like he was kind of underrated. And although he didn't have numbers that are going to blow you away in the stat sheet, I mean, when you look at the kind of catches that Hayden Hurst made, he was pretty good. And I feel like last season probably was the most productive year of his career. And you look at Irv Smith, this is somebody who's going to be able to benefit playing alongside an incredible group of wide receivers. So there's going to be opportunities for him when those guys end up getting locked up, which rarely happens. But when Joe Burrow needs to get the football out fast, I think Irv Smith could end up becoming a really favorable target for him. Irv Smith is more athletic than Hayden Hurst, in my opinion, and I think he's a better overall tight end than what Hayden Hurst brings to the table. I just think that Irv Smith is a guy who's been underutilized, and being in an offense where you have so many great receivers is going to give you easy chances to make some big plays. So don't be surprised if you see Irv Smith end up having some really good moments for Cincinnati this year. I definitely want to see what he's going to do in training camp with Cincinnati, playing with an elite quarterback in Joe Burrow. I think Irv Smith could end up being a sneaky good pickup for the Cincinnati Bengals. So this is my Cincinnati Bengals training camp preview. Let me know if there are some things that I missed that you're going to be looking out for, some players to watch, maybe a position battle that I didn't touch on. Now, let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens going into camp are one of the most talented teams in the AFC. Now, the biggest storyline for the Ravens is going to be, how is this offense going to look under Todd Monken? Todd Monken, he comes from being the former OC at the University of Georgia for the last couple of years. Their offenses were some of the best in college football. He helped guide them to 2 back-to-back national championships. And when you look at this offense going into training camp, you already know what you're getting from your wide receiver position. You're going to have OBJ, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. But who's going to be wide receiver 3 behind those guys? You still do have James Proche. You also have Devin Duvernay there. But what about Nelson Aguilar? Could he be wide receiver 4 behind Rashad Bateman? You're looking at who's going to be that key guy, who's going to be the first man to step up in case of an injury going down. Now, the second thing that I'm looking at for the Baltimore Ravens outside of wide receiver 4 is who's starting at left guard. Now, they lost their starting left guard and Ben Powers in free agency, who now is with the Denver Broncos, and they got to find a replacement for him. Now, their expected starter at left guard is rookie, and I'm going to try to pronounce his name to the best of my ability, Malasala Amuaveya. Now, he was a 6th-round selection by Baltimore from this past year's draft, hailing from the University of Oregon, and I had a way higher grade than what most analysts had on him. Like, I get it, he's more of an offensive tackle, but I feel like with him at guard, with his size and his athleticism and what he showed on tape last season at Oregon, I mean, this dude is good enough to be a starting caliber offensive guard right away. Now, they probably will have some groin pains with starting him week 1, but I just look at the upside, and the upside is insane. This dude has insane strength. I mean, if you go back and you watch his tape at Oregon, he was literally bullying defensive linemen around in the Pac-12 conference, fam. And you already know that the Pac-12 conference, I don't really think they got a lot of great interior defensive linemen that come from there. So obviously there may be a little bit of an adjustment in the level of competition going from the Pac-12 to the NFL. But this dude was just a wrecking ball at offensive guard for Oregon. And I like his speed. I like his athleticism. He's one of those old school, big offensive guards that just are going to maul you to the ground. Now, his pass blocking does have to improve, but I feel like in run blocking, he's really solid. And I think that's a huge reason why we were hearing reports about him getting first-team reps near the tail end of minicamp for the Baltimore Ravens. And John Harbaugh has had a lot of great reviews about him so far. So if I had to pick who probably was going to end up winning this left guard position, I probably would go with Amuaveya Laulu. Hope I said that right. But if I didn't, I apologize to him. You know, those Hawaiian names are really difficult to pronounce, but when you look at who's going to be behind him, I think it's kind of a little bit of a drop-off. You mean to tell me that you think that John Simpson is going to be able to start over him? Now, John Simpson has a good amount of experience. He was drafted by the Raiders in the 2020 NFL draft. He was a 4th-round pick, and he didn't play well with the Las Vegas Raiders. They ended up releasing him last season. He got signed to the Ravens practice squad at the end of the year, and he pretty much gave him a future/reserves deal. So if John Simpson makes the roster, I think it probably is as a backup, because somebody with this kind of experience, I think you would love to have on your roster. But comparing him to Amuaveya Laulu, I don't really think that he's going to end up winning this position battle if it's really down to him and Laulu, because I just think that when you look at Laulu, I just think that there's just way too much upside with him, and I just think that there's way too much explosiveness that comes with him as a run blocker, and that's what the Ravens kind of look for in their offensive linemen. They look for big, strong guys who are really athletic down there. So I like Laulu. I'm going to try to pronounce his name one more time. Sala Amuaveya Laulu. I really like him to win the starting left guard position for the Baltimore Ravens, but we also can't forget about Ben Cleveland. Ben Cleveland has started a few games for the Baltimore Ravens, but he has missed time due to injuries, and plus, he is a little bit inconsistent. And this is somebody who was a 3rd-round pick by B. Moore in 2021. Now, he has good size. He definitely does have the potential to be a really good offensive guard if he's able to maximize that potential. But I think he's more of a good backup option right now. And then you also have experimented with offensive tackle Daniel Falele. You've moved him around at offensive guard during minicamp and OTA. So you also might experiment with what he can do there. Patrick McCarry is somebody who can play all positions on the offensive line, so maybe he's going to be in this competition as well. But you guys know who I'm rolling with to win this left guard position, man. I'm going with Salah Amuavea Lalulu to win the starting left guard spot for the Baltimore Ravens. And if he does, I'm going to be abusing that name for the whole entire NFL season if he ends up being really good. I think he will be. Because the Ravens are a team that's really good at finding talent in the later portions of the draft. So I'm expecting this man to end up winning the starting job. The coaches have been raving about him. I was listening to an interview that John Harbaugh did with the 33rd team. He was saying a lot of good things about him. Like, they like those big athletic guys that can really move. And I really think somebody like him will really transition to offensive guard fairly well. Now, at cornerback, we know that Marlon Humphrey, and I'm trying to think of the other cornerback that you signed who used to play for the Indianapolis Colts. I'm trying to remember. Somebody help me out, man. It's going to come. Rock Ya-Sin. I was about to look it up. So we know that Rock Ya-Sin and Marlon Humphrey are going to be your two starting cornerbacks this year. But who's going to be your corners 3 and 4? Now, Jalen Armour-Daniels was somebody who declared from Alabama last season, who probably should have went back for another year. And he was somebody who has really good size, great athleticism, but he's a really raw cornerback. And last season, when he got opportunities, he did, as expected, he struggled. Because this is somebody who's more of a project cornerback that you just see due to the physical tools and the athletic ability. And hopefully you think that your coaching staff can mold him into a great cornerback. But it didn't really pan out all that well. And I don't really know if he's really going to improve all that much as an outside corner. Maybe he's better off playing in the slot. But Jalen Armour-Daniels is somebody who's going to be in the mix for the 3rd or 4th cornerback competition for the Baltimore Ravens. You got Trayvon Mullen, who was a former 2nd-round pick by the Las Vegas Raiders. And I don't know what the hell happened to Trayvon Mullen. This dude went from being a really solid cornerback his first couple of years in Vegas to getting cut and then getting passed around the league like he was a hot potato. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Trayvon Mullen's cousin is Lamar Jackson. And with Lamar Jackson being highly paid and being the starting quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, I don't really think that Trayvon Mullen's going to get cut. But I don't really see him not having either the 3rd or 4th spot on this depth chart when it comes to corner. I think that Trayvon Mullen, yeah, he may not be starting caliber quality anymore, but I definitely feel like him as your 3rd or 4th best cornerback on your depth chart isn't bad. And he is somebody who can come in and give you a couple of productive games every once in a while, but leaving him out there long term, if you have an injury, I just don't know about that. But if you want him to play in the slot, I think he could be really good in the slot. And I think that Trayvon Mullen may be somebody who kind of has not really been able to benefit from having great coaching. He goes to a Ravens team that is very well coached by their defensive coordinator. And the Ravens, I really feel like, could get the most out of Trayvon Mullen if they want to try to play him in the slot. But even if he has to be their outside corner, you want to be too bad with him starting a couple of games for you if Marlon Humphrey goes down or Rock Ya-Sin goes down. Now, Kyu Blu Kelly really interests me. Cornerback out of Stanford. He kind of reminds me a lot of Jalen Armour-Davis when he was coming out of Bama last year. You have a cornerback that has a lot of physical upside with his size and his athleticism, but he's not the most polished right now. He struggles with really good route runners, so I don't really know if you even want to try to experiment with him in the slot. So maybe he could end up being a really good outside corner. Maybe you could end up moving him to safety. Now, he is really athletic. He is good in man coverage. So, I mean, if you want to put him in the slot, I think he could do okay there. But I don't really know where they're going to put him on this defense. I kind of would love to see him try a little bit of safety. But when you look at Blue Kelly, this is somebody who is really physical. I do think he's pretty good in run coverage as well. And he is solid in man coverage. It's just that he at times can get beat with double moves. And if he's going against a really savvy route runner, he's going to get carved up. Now, Amari Williams got playing time in the slot last year. I definitely think he probably is going to be in the mix for one of those third or fourth cornerback spots, but I don't really see him as an outside corner. I think he's more of a slot guy. So if they end up having an injury with their starting slot cornerback, I think you go ahead and you insert him there. But if I had to give you guys my prediction about who the third and fourth cornerbacks are probably going to be, I probably would go with Trayvon Mullen to get one of those spots. And honestly, I don't really know who else would be behind them because I'm not really insanely excited about what the Ravens have behind their two starting cornerbacks. So maybe cornerback is something that they should look for free agency to add a little bit more depth to. But I mean, they just have guys who are insanely athletic, good upside, but they still have a long ways to go when it comes to at least being a serviceable cornerback in the league. So if you can find somebody that's at least Trayvon Mullen caliber as your backup cornerbacks, I think you can be fairly fine. Maybe Jalen Armour-Davis takes that next step in development. You got to remember, this was somebody who really was just a developmental project when he was coming out of Bama. So it's going to take a couple of years for him to really show you what he has. So maybe Jalen Armour-Davis puts it all together. I probably would go with him to get that fourth cornerback spot. I think Amari Williams is more of a slot guy. So my players to watch for B-More. Definitely got to keep my eyes on Zay Flowers. He was my #1 ranked receiver coming out. Fantastic route runner, dynamic after the catch. And even though he's undersized, you can move him around. He can both play outside and the slot position as well. And I want to see him have a lot of highlight reel plays during training camp that get posted rapidly nonstop against the Baltimore Ravens. This is what you want to see out of a rookie wide receiver. And I was talking to one of my friends who was like, man, JT, like, you don't have just a little bit of doubt that Zay Flowers is not going to work out? And I told him no, because first of all, he's playing with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And two, he's a very good route runner. So when you have a elite quarterback and you're great at running routes, the chances of you being a bust are highly slim unless you're just one of those guys who are just injury prone or you can't catch the football and you can't get off the line. The second player that I'm going to be watching throughout training camp for Baltimore is Isaiah Likely. And this is somebody who I haven't seen a lot of Ravens fans talking about. And it's really surprising to me considering all the hype that he got last year throughout training camp and the preseason for the Baltimore Ravens. Like, the two players who got the most hype from the Ravens fan base during training camp and preseason last year were Isaiah Likely and also their second-year defensive tackle going into this year, Travis Jones out of UConn. And you haven't really heard too much about those guys so far up to this point. So I want to hear Isaiah Likely making some noise throughout training camp. And some of y'all kind of sleep on Isaiah Likely and what he could potentially do in this Todd Monken offense. He can go two tight ends. Todd Monken ran a lot of two tight end sets during his time being the OC for Georgia. And you already have Mark Andrews on the field, but you have Isaiah Likely, who is more athletic than what Mark Andrews is. Now, he isn't more polished than what Mark Andrews is as the tight end position, because Mark Andrews is one of the best tight ends in the game. I'm not going to disrespect Mark Andrews like that, but you look at a guy like Isaiah Likely, his rookie season was a little bit underrated. 36 receptions, 373 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. I think that's really good production considering the situation that Isaiah Likely was in, being the tight end 2 behind Mark Andrews last season. So imagine what he can do in this Todd Monken offense. You looking for some sleepers on your fantasy football squad to take a risk on when you just have picks to throw away near the end of your drives? You should definitely look into Isaiah Likely. This dude was tearing it up last offseason, tearing it up in the preseason, and he had a pretty good rookie season considering the fact that he was in his first season being the tight end for the Baltimore Ravens. That's not an easy transition to make. So look out for Isaiah Likely this year. I want to hear a lot of good stuff about him throughout training camp. And then, as I mentioned, Travis Jones. Like Isaiah Likely, he was getting a lot of hype and a lot of attention. And last year, he had a pretty decent rookie season, considering the fact that he only played 35% of the Ravens' defensive snaps. I'm expecting him to have a breakout year for Baltimore this year. And they need some productive young pass rushers because Justin Houston, JPP, those guys are gone. Now, you can always bring back Justin Houston because he still currently is a free agent right now, but you need your other young pass rushers to step up. And I think Travis Jones could be one of those guys that ends up breaking out on the interior of that Baltimore Ravens defensive line. This is somebody who is incredibly explosive, really strong. And if you go back and you watch that preseason game that the Ravens played against the Tennessee Titans last year, I mean, this guy was a wrecking crew, a one-man wrecking crew on the Baltimore Ravens defensive line. This dude could not be stopped. And like I said, his rookie season, I felt was pretty decent considering that he didn't really play a large amount of the snaps for Baltimore last year. So if he can get 50 to 60% of the Ravens defensive snaps this season, I feel like he's a guy who probably could give you 4 or 5 sacks from that interior defensive line position at D tackle. Now, 2 guys I'm going to be watching next during training camp for Baltimore. These are 2 of some of the Baltimore Ravens' most important players who they need to step up this season: David Ojabo and Odafe Oweh. Now, Odafe Oweh was a first-round pick a couple of years back out of Penn State. And so far throughout his career, I've been a little bit disappointed. Now, I don't know if you're a Ravens fan, what your expectations were for Odafe Oweh, but I didn't think it was going to take this long for him to start making an impact. And last year, he only had 3 sacks. Okay, now, I'm expecting him to be a guy who should at least be able to give you 7, 8 sacks this year. And you're going to need that because where is your production going to come from when it comes to your pass rushers? You need Odafe Oweh to at least be able to show you a little something. So I feel like 7, 8 sacks is fairly realistic and fair expectations for Odafe Oweh. And I need to hear him making a lot of noise throughout training camp, because if not, I'm going to be fairly concerned about the Ravens pass rush going into this year. And David Ojabo, now last year kind of was a red shirt year for David Ojabo. And technically, you could probably label him still a rookie because he didn't really get too much in-game action. I think he only appeared in 2 or 3 games maybe last year due to that injury that he suffered before the draft. So David Ojabo is basically going into his first full-time year in the NFL, having no injuries to set him back. And for David Ojabo, if you are somebody who keeps up with the NFL draft, prior to that injury that he suffered, he would have been a top 15 pick, or he was expected to be a top 15 selection. So this is somebody who the Ravens got in the 2nd round of the draft, who was a first-round top 15 caliber talent. So with David Ojabo and Odafe Oweh going into this year, I think the Ravens need both of those 2 guys to flash. And you don't need those guys to give you 10 sacks, but you need those guys to at least give you 7 sacks each at worst. And I think that David Ojabo is capable of that. Odafe Oweh, there's no reason why he shouldn't be able to do it, because he's going into his 3rd season now, and he has to show you something. He has to flash. And the Ravens are an organization that does a pretty good job with drafting defensive linemen. So when you look at the kind of players that the Ravens have had up front over the last couple of years and how good they are at finding pass rushers, like, I expect David Ojabo and Odafe Oweh to have a really good training camp and carry that momentum into the regular season. Before we get into the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns, if you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead, leave a like on the stream, and subscribe to the channel. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. I got to get me a little sip of water real quick. We're going to read the comments real quick. Mr. Jones says, tighten up, Cincinnati bungholes. maybe on paper, barring injury. Football isn't played on paper, though. Who is the Ravens QB? That's funny. Ravens Pro says, yeah, I am concerned about their pass rush. Like, I'm concerned, but I do have faith that David Ojabo and Odafe Oweh will be able to put it together this year, man. At least you're hoping so if you're a Ravens fan. Make sure that you guys go ahead, give us a 5-star review. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. We are trying to get to 100 5-star reviews before the season starts, so go ahead and give us a 5-star review if you support the channel. You can find the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the podcast down in the comment section down below, or you can go to whichever podcasting service that you like to use, type in the JT Sports Podcast, and it will pop up. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going into training camp with a lot of optimism. They gave Kenny Pickett a more improved offensive line. This is an offensive line that people are nicknaming the Pickett Fence. And one of the biggest storylines for the Steelers heading into training camp this year is at left tackle. Because you know the Steelers traded up to draft Broderick Jones, right? And Broderick Jones is really athletically gifted. I mean, this dude in the open field is a monster. This dude is super fast. He's super strong. This dude is like the Incredible Hulk playing football. And the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted him with the expectations of him becoming their franchise left tackle. But you know, the Steelers are the kind of organization that just because you're a first-round pick, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to start. So Broderick Jones is going to get into training camp having to prove himself, being able to win the starting left tackle job from Dan Moore. And I'm going to just be honest with you, right? If Broderick Jones cannot beat out Dan Moore throughout training camp this year, I'm going to be really, really worried. And you may say, man, JT, he's a rookie. You know this man is a developmental project, man. Like, he may not be able to start day one. I do understand that. But you also got to understand the guy who he's going to be competing for the left tackle job with. Dan Moore was one of the worst left tackles in the NFL last year. So I don't feel like the bar is too high for Broderick Jones to have to be able to climb. And I don't think that Broderick Jones can be any worse than what Dan Moore was at left tackle. Now, maybe Dan Moore ends up improving throughout training camp, and we would definitely like that. But I'm expecting Broderick Jones to end up winning the starting left tackle job for the Steelers. And for the people who keep saying he's a developmental project, like, a lot of the issues that people have on Broderick Jones, I think can be fixed with coaching, which is something that Mike Tomlin loves to do. And Mike Tomlin, if you hear him in any interview, he always says that if you're a coach who's scared to take a flyer on the player because you feel like there's some issues that needs to be coached up, then you're not a good coach, because as a coach, your job is to coach. It's to be a teacher. It's to help players get better. You shouldn't expect the player just to come out just because he was a first-round pick to be a polished product. Like, everybody needs a little bit of work. I feel like Broderick Jones is going to be a lot better than what many people are expecting him to be. I think he can be better than Paris Johnson, who was most people's #1 offensive tackle coming out of this past year's draft. I love his athleticism. If you're a linebacker or a defensive back, if this dude gets his hands on you, you are going down to the damn ground. This dude is going to bulldoze you like he's a freight train. So I think that Broderick Jones is going to end up winning the starting left tackle job from Dan Moore. Now, if Dan Moore ends up winning it, I would be fairly surprised, and I would be really worried about Broderick Jones. But I feel like Broderick Jones is going to be able to win this starting left tackle job. And there was a lot of praise about Broderick Jones and how he performed throughout minicamp for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cam Hayward gave him some praise as well. So going to be eager to see how he does in training camp. Another position battle for the Pittsburgh Steelers that we got to talk about is who's going to be the starting strong safety, DeMonte Casey or Keanu Neal. Now, I'm a big fan of Keanu Neal. Maybe I'm still living in a little bit of nostalgia from his Pro Bowl season with the Atlanta Falcons, but you look at what he brings to the table. This isn't just somebody who can play safety. He can play in the slot. He can play linebacker a little bit. So I feel like even if he doesn't end up winning the starting job over Damontae Kazee, I at least feel like the Steelers and Mike Tomlin are going to have some special packages for him. Like he can be like a nickel or dime linebacker in certain packages. You can also move him near the line of scrimmage and have him play coverage against tight ends and running backs that are coming out of the backfield. So I do feel like even if he doesn't end up winning the starting safety job, there is a pretty good role for Keanu Neal to have. Now, some people are going to be like, JT, don't forget about Trey Norwood. Like, Trey Norwood, I think he isn't really cut out for safety, really. I probably like him a little bit more in the slot than I do at safety. Damontae Kazee probably is going to be the favorite to win the job in most Steelers fans' eyes. He was really productive when he was on the field last year when Terrell Edmunds was off the field, and I felt like he was better than Terrell Edmunds last season, and I was even pushing for him to be the full-time starter over Terrell Edmunds. So when the Steelers didn't bring back Terrell Edmunds, you don't know how happy I was. And Terrell Edmunds is not a bad safety. This dude is definitely really solid. It's just that he never played up to the level of expectations that you expect from a safety that gets drafted in the first round. You take a safety in the first round, you're expecting Derwin James, fam. You're expecting to be one of the best safeties in the game if you get drafted in the first round as a safety. And if you don't end up being an elite safety and you're just a serviceable or good safety like what Terrell Edmunds was, you're going to be considered a little bit of a letdown. So you get Damontae Kazee, who was very good in the limited role that he had last season. He had 2 interceptions, and he had a pretty big impact every time he was on the field for Pittsburgh, and not really playing a lot of the snaps due to Terrell Edmunds being ahead of him. I think he probably should be the favorite to win this strong safety job over Keanu Neal, which I am rooting for Keanu Neal, but I just think that Damontae Kazee is better than him. Now, I know that his age may scare people off. You would like somebody who's young, enter their 20s, to get that starting safety job for you. But I think that Damontae Kazee is a pretty savvy veteran. He's been around the league for a while. So I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a really good home for him. And you got to remember that if he can play the way that he did last season, with him not really having as many opportunities as a guy that starts, imagine what he can do playing 100% of the snaps on defense. So I'm really excited about Damontae Kazee and what he can bring to the table as the starting safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and hopefully he can be better than Terrell Edmunds. And Terrell Edmunds wasn't bad, but he wasn't great, and I think that Damontae Kazee probably could end up being really good for Pittsburgh instead of really solid, which is what Terrell Edmunds was. Now, the players that I'm going to be watching throughout training camp for Pittsburgh this year is going to be rookie cornerback Joey Porter. If the Steelers are going to have a good season this year, I think Joey Porter is going to be a big reason for it. This, in my opinion, was arguably the best cornerback coming out of this past year's draft class. He's a very aggressive man-to-man press coverage corner. He wants to get in your face, and he wants to beat you up. And you look at Pittsburgh, you already have Levi Wallace on the opposite side. Now, who's going to end up being cornerback 1, Joey Porter or Levi Wallace? I probably still would go with Levi Wallace just because I don't know if the Steelers are going to throw Joey Porter to the Wolves that early, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up becoming cornerback 1. He does have the upside, he does have the potential, he does have the youth, and he does have the athleticism to win that starting cornerback 1 job over Levi Wallace. But even if he's cornerback 2, he's still going to have a pretty big impact on the Steelers defense. And going into training camp, you're going to be matched up against George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Allen Robinson. So there's going to be plenty of challenges for Joey Porter to have to overcome to prove himself, to show that, hey, I can come in and be the number 1 guy right away. You don't have to make me a second guy behind Levi Wallace. And Levi Wallace was pretty solid last year. So if Joey Porter can end up dethroning Levi Wallace from being that first cornerback on this depth chart and dethrone him to that number 2 spot and he takes over, that would give me huge amounts of confidence in Joey Porter going into this season. I think that Joey Porter is more than capable of being able to do that. This was somebody who I thought would have been a top 15 pick, and he ended up being available come the Steelers' first pick of the second round. And his dad also played for Pittsburgh well. So normally when you got somebody's son who ends up getting drafted by the team that his pops played for, most of the times they end up being pretty productive. So I'm keeping my eyes on Joey Porter. Keanu Benton, defensive tackle, rookie out of Wisconsin, was also drafted in the second round. And a lot of people really, really love this pick. And when you look at Keanu Benton play, this is somebody who is really quick, really explosive. I mean, you watch this man play, you kind of get a little bit scared that he's a defensive tackle. You like, damn, this dude's a defensive tackle moving like this. This is scary. This is scary. Now, he's not one of those Jordan Davises or Jalen Carters, but I think he's a tier beneath what those guys were as prospects. And I think that right away, with him being the starter on the interior defensive line of Pittsburgh next to Larry Ogunjobi, he immediately is going to help boost this Pittsburgh Steelers run defense, because that's something that he was really phenomenal at doing at Wisconsin. Now, he didn't get pushed around too often. I do want to see him develop more when it comes to what he's going to bring as a pass rusher. But I really think that this is somebody who's going to come in and have a really big impact as a rookie. So the two rookies that I'm the most highest on for Pittsburgh this year are Joey Porter Jr. and Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin. A lot of people really love Keanu Benton. Now, let's go to the offensive side of the football, right? What are some players that Steelers fans need to look out for on offense during training camp? For me, it's going to be wide receiver Hakeem Butler. Now, Hakeem Butler, some of y'all might remember that name. You were like, JT, wasn't this the dude who was getting all this hype in the 2019 NFL draft out of Iowa State? Yes, it is. And you wonder why you haven't heard from Hakeem Butler ever since? Well, he's bounced around the league a little bit. He also played in the XFL this past season, and he was pretty good. And I was watching a good amount of the XFL, and Hakeem Butler was just a man amongst boys in the XFL. This dude was a fantastic deep threat down the field. Every time Agent McCarron threw the ball up to Hakeem Butler downfield, he went up and got it. And you look at the fact that you don't really have concerns with your fourth and fifth wide receivers, but this is somebody who definitely could end up, dethroning a Miles Boykin or end up being the fourth wide receiver on this depth chart. Because one thing that the Steelers love are really big body wide receivers that you can tell them just go downfield and we're going to throw it up to you. And you look at Hakeem Butler, I think that him and Pittsburgh could end up being a really good fit. Now, I do want to see what he does as a run blocker, because that's also going to be a plus. That's something that Miles Boykin is really good at. And you look at his size, he's 6'5", 227 pounds. So imagine how much of a threat he can be as your fourth option behind A-Rob, Deontay, and George Pickens. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Hakeem Butler does throughout training camp for Pittsburgh, because during his time in the XFL, this dude was a deep ball 50-50 machine. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Mike Williams, and I do think that Hakeem Butler is a better player now than what he was when he was first coming into the league and he was playing for the Arizona Cardinals. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he performs in training camp, and I'm really expecting Hakeem Butler to make this roster. It may be a little bit crazy. I know some people may be like, man, JT, he's not somebody who's going to stick. He's going to be a practice squad guy at best. I really think Hakeem Butler can carve out a role on this Steelers offense. You can always use a wide receiver that's a big body guy that you just say, F it, he's down there somewhere, just throw it up to him. He also could be a really good red zone weapon. So I'm just rooting for Hakeem Butler. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm always a fan of players who come from leagues like the USFL and the XFL. And the last guy I'm going to be keeping my eyes on is Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren, I told you guys around this time last year when I did my Pittsburgh Steelers training camp preview in 2022 to look out for Jaylen Warren. Now, Jaylen Warren, I watched a lot of him during his time at Oklahoma State, and I was telling you guys that he was going to be somebody who was going to take that RB2 job by the throat. And what did I tell you? He was really good last season. And some people say that he's good enough to be on RB1 on a good amount of teams. And when you look at the skill set that Jaylen Warren brings, I think he's more explosive and more shiftier than Najee Harris. I think that Najee Harris is the better overall back, but you're looking at a good running back to be able to give Najee Harris a breather at times. Jaylen Warren definitely is that guy, and I want to see what he does going into year 2. How better is he going to be? Because last season he was pretty good, but if he ends up taking another big step in development this year, maybe him and Najee Harris actually end up legitimately splitting playing time this year. Maybe Najee Harris gets about 50% of the carries and Jaylen Warren gets 50% of the carries, because I think that Jaylen Warren is a really good running back. Now, that probably won't turn out how I wanted to. Jaylen Warren probably may at best get 25-30% of the carries, but I think that Najee Harris probably is going to be the workhorse back. But Pittsburgh has put a lot of emphasis on making sure that they can stretch out Najee Harris' career as long as possible, and a lot of Steelers fans don't want Najee Harris getting overworked real early, like how the Steelers did with Le'Veon Bell, running him into the dirt really early in his career. So Jaylen Warren, looking forward to seeing what he does throughout training camp for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is my training camp preview for the Steelers. Let me know if there are some things that you're going to be looking out for, some position battles that I may have not talked about on this. Now, the Cleveland Browns are really interesting because their biggest concern going into training camp is going to be who's going to be their second reliable option in the passing game outside of Amari Cooper at wide receiver. Now, they got a lot of talent at wide receiver. They traded for Elijah Moore, who was playing with the New York Jets, underutilized, couldn't really find a role for him in that offense. And he's been really impressive so far for the Cleveland Browns throughout OTAs and mini camps. There's been a lot of Cleveland Brown websites that have been hyping up Elijah Moore. So I want to see, is he going to be able to put it all together throughout training camp? Because we already know there's a lot of guys who look really good in shorts and tank tops, and then we get to training camp, and then we get to the regular season, we don't really hear about them. But Elijah Moore was somebody who was getting a lot of praise when he was coming out of Ole Miss a couple of years ago. And you look at him with a guy like Deshaun Watson, if he does end up holding on to that starting slot receiver role, which he should, I think this is somebody who could have a breakout season. Now, you also have my guy, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, Donovan Peoples-Jones isn't going to be starting in the slot over Elijah Moore, but you're just looking at a guy who, are you going to be that consistent second option? Are the Browns going to have somebody who they can consistently go to, who can get the job done over and over again when Amari Cooper isn't open? And when you look at a Donovan Peoples-Jones, this is somebody who has been pretty productive over his last couple of years with the Cleveland Browns. I think he had a pretty solid 2022 campaign. He caught 61 passes for 839 receiving yards. He had 3 touchdown catches as well. Has a lot of upside with his size, his athleticism, but I still feel like there's a possibility that my guy Cedric Tillman could end up starting over Donovan Peoples-Jones. And Cedric Tillman was the most underrated wide receiver coming out of the 2023 NFL draft. He was better than Jalen Hyatt, and I felt like he was a first-round caliber wide receiver. When you watch Cedric Tillman, there's no way you can't tell me you don't see a little bit of Mike Evans. Like, I see a lot of Mike Evans when I watch Cedric Tillman play. And I really feel like Cedric Tillman, throughout training camp, can prove to the Cleveland Browns coaching staff that he could end up being a better number 2 option than Donovan Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore potentially. Like Elijah Moore, I think he's going to be really good in the slot for the Cleveland Browns. But as a second option, I really like Cedric Tillman to be that guy. He has really good hands. He's a really good athlete for his size. And he's also pretty good after the catch, in my opinion. And he's somebody who you can throw the football downfield. He can go get those 50-50 balls for you. So I think that Cedric Tillman has way more talent and upside than a guy like a Donovan Peoples-Jones does. So I think that Cedric Tillman could end up being a really good pickup in the steal for the Cleveland Browns, depending on how he performs this season. And training camp is going to be the proving ground for Cedric Tillman. You also do have David Bell, Marquise Goodwin there. Now, the next important position battle that we're looking at for the Cleveland Browns is going to be on the defensive line. Now, we know that Dalvin Tomlinson is going to be one of your starting defensive tackles, but who's going to be the next one next to him? Okay, now, you got a good amount of guys. You got Jordan Elliott, who started every game for the Cleveland Browns last year, but to put it nicely, he just wasn't all that good. Now, maybe he ends up winning the starting job in training camp in the preseason and ends up getting the starting nod this year again. But you also do have defensive tackles, Maurice Hurst, Tristan Hill, who you signed in free agency, guys who could be pretty good depth guys behind Jordan Elliott and Dalvin Tomlinson potentially. But I think that Maurice Hurst and Tristan Thompson also could push for one of those starting defensive tackle jobs. And then you got rookie Siaka Ika, who you drafted out of Baylor in the 3rd round of this past year's draft. Now, he doesn't bring much from a pass rush standpoint, but he definitely is really good against the run. This dude is an anchor in the run game. He's somebody who's able to make plays outside the tackles, inside the tackles as well. So I think that he could be a guy who could end up getting the starting nod next to Dalvin Tomlinson, just for the fact that he's going to be really good against the run. And you look at the struggles that the Cleveland Browns had defending the run last year, which is why they brought in a new defensive coordinator, and they brought in so much depth and talent and paid big money to Dalvin Tomlinson, because they need somebody who can clog up those running lanes and be really formidable against the run. So I think that you're going to get that from Ika, and you're going to get that from Dalvin Tomlinson. Now, are they looking for more out of their defensive tackles? They want a defensive tackle that not only is good against the run, but also can give you more from a pass rush standpoint. I probably think it would go to Jordan Elliott. But I do feel like Siaka Ika could end up being a guy who ends up having a pretty good role if he doesn't end up getting the starting nod for the Browns this year. Now, players for the Cleveland Browns that I'm going to have my eyes on this season and throughout training camp, the first one is going to be Jerome Ford. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you guys would know that I've been a big fan of Jerome Ford during his time with the Cincinnati Bearcats, and I thought that he was the 3rd best running back coming out of last year's draft. So I was insanely shocked and flabbergasted when the Cleveland Browns got him late in the NFL draft that year. Like, I don't know what scouts saw in Jerome Ford that I was missing that made him fall that many rounds, but I thought that he was going to be a 2nd round, 3rd round pick. And they end up getting him late in the draft, and I think that he's going to be an incredible replacement for Kareem Hunt. And there are people who are saying that Kareem Hunt is still a really good back. Like, Kareem Hunt is not the running back that he used to be. Okay? Like, Kareem Hunt, he's lost a lot of speed. He doesn't really have the acceleration and the burst that he used to have a couple of years back. So I think they were right to move on from him. I do think that Jerome Ford is going to be a really good RB2 behind Nick Chubb, and he is going to get opportunities because, you know, the Cleveland Browns are a team that runs a 2 running back kind of system anyway. So Nick Chubb is going to get most of the carries, but Jerome Ford is going to have some opportunities to show everybody why he was one of the biggest steals of that draft when the Cleveland Browns got him where they got him. And one thing that I really like about Jerome Ford is that I think that he has incredible vision, and he also has really good acceleration. So I'm a big fan of Jerome Ford. I'm going to be having my eyes on him throughout training camp. And then we already touched a little bit about wide receiver Cedric Tillman. I think he has a lot of similarities to Mike Evans. He can be a really good 50-50 ball wide receiver when you're looking for somebody to throw the football to downfield, but he also can be a problem after the catch with how fast he is and that size that he has. So I'm a really big fan of Cedric Tillman. got to keep my eyes on him. Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, Dorian Thompson-Robinson isn't competing for the starting quarterback job, but he is competing for the QB2, QB3 job with Joshua Dobbs and my dude Kellen Mond. Now, DTR was somebody who many people viewed as a gem prospect. And what a gem prospect is a prospect that has potential to outplay where they get drafted at. For example, Dak Prescott was a mid-round selection, and he ended up being a really good selection by the Dallas Cowboys because he's one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. Not one of the best, but one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And if you can find a top 15 quarterback in the middle portions of the NFL draft, that's a steal. So when you look at Dorian Thompson-Robinson, this is somebody who has really good arm strength. I think that he does a pretty good job reading the field. I feel like a lot of his mistakes are just him trying to force the issue. He also does have really good athleticism. He is really good throwing the football on the run, and every single year that he played for UCLA, he got better. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Dorian Thompson-Robinson does for the Cleveland Browns throughout training camp, and maybe he ends up winning that third quarterback job over Kellen Mond. I think Kellen Mond probably could be a guy that ends up getting the deuces, or maybe they put him on the practice squad in case they have an injury to Deshaun Watson, unfortunately, and you got to start Joshua Dobbs, and then you can insert Kellen Mond to be your quarterback 3, and then DTR becomes your QB2 in that situation. But I'm just really looking forward to watching DTR, to be honest with you, because I'm just a big fan of his game. I watched him when he was coming out of high school, so he's just somebody that I'm just following just because he may not have like a really big impact on the Cleveland Browns winning games or not this year, but he's just a player that I really have taken a liking to over the years, and just following his career from high school to college to the NFL. I'm just somebody who loves keeping up with players that I watched and kept up with coming out of high school, and to see him in the NFL, I'm kind of happy for him. Keeping it real, like I was watching his highlights when I was in 11th grade in high school. So I'm really happy that DTR has gotten an opportunity with the Cleveland Browns. They drafted him in the 5th round. There were some people who thought that he probably was going to go undrafted, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up winning that backup quarterback job over Joshua Dobbs. But at worst, I expect him to be QB3 over Kellen Mond. I saw an article a couple of hours ago that said that Quinn Ewers could potentially be a top 10 pick in the 2024 NFL draft. Now, I don't think this is a crazy hot take. Now, where I rank Quinn Ewers right now in terms of where he ranks amongst the other draft eligible quarterbacks for next year's draft, I have him at QB 4 and 5. My thing with Quinn Ewers is that last year was his first season ever starting a college football game. And I wasn't expecting anything crazy, but you got to remember that coming out of high school, he got a lot of hype. He was one of the highest rated recruits ever in history. So, of course, the expectations were going to be through the roof. But Quinn Ewers, I felt like his first season starting at Texas was the definition of a roller coaster. He had some really big performances. Ideally, that game against Alabama when he was going off. I mean, everything that you look for in a potential first-round quarterback, you saw in Quinn Ewers' performance against Alabama. You look at a quarterback who was really good making decisions with the football, a quarterback who made a lot of big throws and tight windows. He did that against Alabama, and he also showed really great accuracy in that game against Alabama. And if he never would have got injured, I'm pretty confident that Texas would have pulled off that upset. But then after that game, Quinn Ewers never really looked like the same quarterback that he was against Alabama. And a large reason for that was, like I said earlier, it was his first season starting. So anytime you have an inexperienced starter, there's going to be some ups and downs. And he's a really streaky player. A streaky player is somebody who, they have stretches during the game where if they start out fast, they're going to have a really good game. But if they have stretches where they start the game out a little bit slow, then they're just going to have a bad performance for the whole entire game. And with Quinn Ewers, I see a lot of streakiness in him. He has inconsistency with his accuracy, his footwork needs work, but that's what you expect coming from a first-year starter in college football, and this dude is fairly young. I think that he went to Ohio State at the age of 17. So I expect Quinn Ewers to improve this year. Now, I don't know if he will be a top 10 pick if he ends up improving. I will at least need another season for me to tell if he's worthy of being a top 10 pick, because honestly, the only two QBs that I feel will be worth taking in the top 10 right now in next year's draft is Caleb Williams and Drake May. And outside of that, there's a lot of question marks with some of these other QBs, like Michael Penix. You wonder if he can stay healthy. Bo Nix, I like him, but I think that he's more of a late first rounder than he is being a top 10 selection. So you look at Quinn Ewers, what I do like about him and what potentially could catapult him to being in a top 10 discussion in next year's draft is the fact that this is somebody who is really good at throwing the football from different arm angles. He can throw the football on the run. He can change his arm angle and still get the ball out. And I think that one thing that I really loved about Quinn Ewers' games that really stood out to me the most was the fact that he has incredible ball placement. And you don't really see that from a guy who struggles with being consistent with accuracy. But his ball placement was really good at times. It does help when you're throwing to a guy like Xavier Worthy, but I think that his ball placement is some of the best that I've seen. And I think that he gives me a lot of CJ Stroud vibes. I think that he could be a more athletic version of CJ Stroud, because maybe Quinn Ewers, maybe we get to see him run a little bit more and show a little bit more of his mobility this year at Texas. But for right now, I'm going to say I could see Quinn Ewers being a top 20, top 15 pick, a mid-round selection if he ends up reaching his potential with Texas this year. And even if he reaches his potential, you know, I know some people are going to be like, man, JT, this dude was one of the highest rated recruits ever. What you mean if he reaches his potential? If he reaches his potential, isn't he a top 10 pick? It's like, you're telling me that Quinn Ewers is going to be good enough to be one of the third quarterbacks taken off the board in next year's draft? I mean, Drake May and Caleb Williams, we know that they're probably sure in things to be top 5, top 10 picks, but outside of that, how many teams really need QB? And right now, I don't really see Quinn Ewers, even if he ends up reaching that ceiling, being a top 10 pick, because his arm isn't as good as what I initially thought it was. And plus, he doesn't really have the elite athleticism that you're looking for from a quarterback that ends up getting drafted that high. So for Quinn Ewers, you know, if he ends up playing well and he ends up developing and he ends up reaching his potential, I view him more of a mid-round selection, because he probably is going to have a little bit more work that's going to need to be done. So he'll probably be a mid-round selection. He'll be somebody that'll have some high upside. He'll be somebody that you'll take a risk with. You'll let him sit for 1 year as a starter, and then eventually he'll end up becoming a really good starter in the league. But a top 10 pick, I feel like a top 10 pick, you either got to have one or two things. You either got to have elite, out-of-this-world potential, or you got to be somebody who can come in right away and be an impact starter. And I don't really see that in Quinn Ewers. Like, coming out of high school, like, I understood the hype, but watching him last year, like, I didn't really see all the out-of-this-world potential. Like, I think he has potential to be a really good starting caliber quarterback at the NFL level, but him being a top 10 pick, I don't know, man. I don't really think he has that kind of ceiling like a guy like Anthony Richardson had. Like, oh, he may be a little bit raw, but if you can put it all together, he's going to be one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the game. I don't think he has that kind of ceiling, and I don't think he's going to be a guy who could come in and be an impact starter right away. And this is just based off from what I saw last season. So I think that Quinn Ewers, if he ends up putting it all together this year, which I believe that he will, Steve Sarkisian is really good with developing the quarterback position. I think that he probably could catapult himself into the first round conversation and be a mid-round, late first round selection. But him being a top 10 pick, I just don't know about yet, because you got to see the elite potential, and I don't really see anything from Quinn Ewers that shows me, yeah, like, this guy could be one of the best quarterbacks in the game if he puts it all together. Like, I think he can be a really good quarterback. Not saying that he couldn't be like a top 10 QB or anything like that, but being a top 5 quarterback in the game, that's kind of what you're looking for when you're drafting a quarterback in the top 10. Somebody that has elite upside or somebody that has good enough talent where they can come in and start right away. And I don't think that Quinn Ewers is going to fall in either one of those categories. I think he's going to be more somebody who has a really good season, and he's going to have some potential moments to flash this season, like when they play Alabama on the road and Tuscaloosa again this year. They're going to have a really good game, potentially against Kansas, Oklahoma as well. So Quinn Ewers is going to have some opportunities to show everybody that he deserves to be not just a first-round pick, but a top 10 pick. But right now, like, I really don't think that Quinn Ewers has that kind of ceiling to be a top 10 selection. Now, some of y'all may be like, man, JT, you think Quinn Ewers can't be a top 10 pick, but you think Joe Milton will be? Like, yeah, like, Joe Milton's potential, fam. Like, have you not seen Joe Milton throw a football, dog? Like,
come on now, dog.
Come on, man. Joe Milton probably has one of the strongest arms in the history of American football. Out of Jamarcus Russell, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Milton can fling that thing, and plus, he's a better athlete than what Quinn Ewers is. So, Joe Milton has the kind of upside that can make him a top 10 pick, even if he doesn't have a season as good as Quinn Ewers. The size, the arm strength, and the athleticism is what's going to catapult him into that discussion. Quinn Ewers doesn't have that. Like, his arm strength isn't as good as what I thought it was. He does have good arm talent, but he's not as great as an athlete as I initially thought he was coming out of high school. It's like the people that were giving him these star ratings and all of this praise coming out of high school, is like, watching him right now, I see it, but at the same time, I don't see it. Like, I still see somebody who is capable of being a first-round pick, but I don't see anybody who is going to be this great quarterback that everybody was tapping him out to be when he was coming out of high school and he was getting all this hype. Like, I think he may just be a tad bit overhyped, okay? Like, I get why people were excited about him, but at the same time, even in his best games, it's still like, okay, like, I see the hype, but he still isn't showing me anything crazy. Like, if you're one of the highest rated quarterback recruits ever, I expect you to be able to show me a little bit more when it comes to what you bring to the quarterback position, not just as a passer, but as a runner as well. And we didn't really get to see that a lot out of Quinn Ewers last season. So could Quinn Ewers be a top 10 pick? He could be, but for me personally, even if he ends up having a good season, I think he's going to end 20 projection at best. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I was not expecting to have so many people tuning in to this live stream live, because we talking about training camp, man. Like, do you guys really be excited to hear people talking about training camp? Because I seem to be one of the only people that actually be excited to talk about position battles and guys to watch for during training camp. But this is something that has to be talked about, because a lot of people need to be caught up to date about their teams going into training camp and upcoming position battles. So I appreciate everybody that has tuned in. Make sure that you guys go ahead, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We go live every day at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. Listen to the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. You can find us on Amazon, Spotify, Google, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to know how you can support the channel for free, do you know what you can do? You can go ahead and give us a 5-star review. Go ahead right now. Go to whichever podcasting platform you use, Apple, Spotify, type in the JT Sports Podcast and give us a 5-star review if you haven't already. Or